We are looking closely at the French foreign policy with newly elected President Macron. He shows his open and very critical position towards Russia. She's like a new force in uniting Europe. At the moment, in the context of French involvement into the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, what we can expect?
Yes, so France has gone through tremendous transformation politically, because we have a new president whom nobody knew about a year ago. He was Minister of the Economy during, 18 months, but people didn't really notice him. So he's very new, he's very smart, and he's very popular. 66% of the vote in the second round, even if there was high abstention, still it's amazing for somebody who had no popularity whatsoever a year ago. A new government, with the exception of maybe 3-4 members of government, all the other members of government were unknown to the public, and a new National Assembly where 75%, if I'm not mistaken, of the deputies never were deputies before. So it's an extraordinary overhaul of the political class and political representation in various institutions. Of course, it's difficult to predict what Emmanuel Macron is going to do. First, because he's never been dealing with foreign affairs and security problems before. It's really his very first time. He's learning fast, but he has a lot to learn still. Second, difficult to predict, because France is not the only player. That is, I think what is quite new in what Emmanuel Macron wants to do, and I think he's very right, is not to try and build a new nationalist French policy in Europe or in relations with Russia or the United States. He claims he wants to build a European foreign policy supported by France. He is a Europeanist at heart. He is advised by individuals that know Europe, that some have been MEPs, and so he will go for a pro-European policy. He's going for a very strong Franco-German tandem with Mrs. Merkel, and this is really a new fact, because if you remember with François Hollande or his predecessor Nicolas Sarkozy, France was more on the line of French power projection, like operation in Mali, for example, under Hollande, or with Sarkozy trying to be, the big, strong guy in Europe, but having a national French policy towards Russia, toward the United States, and this is gone. So we are experiencing something very new. I think it's very welcome in Europe. I think most European countries are very happy that France is going to go for a more collective European approach, and this is exactly what we need if we want to have the right policy toward Ukraine and also toward Russia. We need to continue collective action, and the Minsk process is one of the best examples of this.
So how it all would be, these intentions of Macron and this European view, his policy, would be translated into the action regarding how might be translated into some kind of the actions towards Ukraine, towards Russia. We're speaking about, financial support to Ukraine, big involvement into the Normandy meeting and Normandy Four, and there is a bit of the open, I would say it's still an open confrontation and kind of a clear more brave, openly, definitely more brave and open and sincere, stance on, on Putin, for instance, because before it was very...
I think the French position on Putin and the Kremlin leadership has been pretty clear for years. And since the annexation of Crimea, and military conflict in the eastern Donbass. The French government has never taken this lightly, and the confrontation with Russia is now a fact. Every single Western democracy has now a very difficult, tense, and sometimes conflictual relationship with Moscow. So France is not alone in this situation. And so Emmanuel Macron has to think about it. How can he still maintain some kind of state-to-state relationship with the Russian leadership, and at the same time have a policy towards Ukraine, towards Georgia, Moldova, and other countries of the Eastern Partnership, without caring too much about how Moscow may retaliate. So I think this is at the moment what Emmanuel Macron is thinking about, is how to dissociate the policies toward Moscow from our European policies toward Ukraine, but knowing very well that the two problems are impossible to dissociate.
And to what extent we can expect change and maybe big involvement, because France has been always seen in Europe as somebody who would take care about southern borders, about Mediterranean, and not so much about Eastern Europe, where Germany would take a lead.
The fact that we will reinforce the tandem with Germany is a good sign of this. It's not in the French habits to to pay much attention to the smaller countries of the EU when it comes to big security issues. Now, with what the Kremlin is doing, endangering our security, not only because of what it does in Ukraine, but also with cyber subversion, meddling in elections, and other problems, it seems to me that the French people and the French government understand that security issues, that covers everything. Now, the problem for Emmanuel Macron, as I see it, is that although he does understand the need to work together with the other EU partners and also other NATO member states, he also wants to safeguard France's specificity and have some kind of direct relationship with both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. It's difficult with both leaders for very different reasons, but I think this is what he wants to do, is have maybe not a working relationship, but at least some kind of a dialogue with Vladimir Putin, which is why he accepted to have him come to Versailles at the end of May to give him, to give him a try and see how it goes. And probably this is also why he invited Donald Trump to celebrate the 14th of July, Bastille Day, in France, to see how he can establish a one-to-one relationship and maybe reassure the American administration and the American public is very difficult to manage for us too, that we respect the institution of the presidency and chief of state, and it's important to develop whatever kind of relationship can be developed with Donald Trump.
Does this kind of strong, I would say rather strong opposition of Merkel and Macron towards Trump is helpful for Ukraine or not? To what extent then the US could be involved in our negotiation with Russia? Because it's not really the we can see already the alliance between Merkel and Macron. Then we would like to connect. Where is here Washington, where Moscow, Putin himself, and also Ukraine and how it affects Ukraine?
I think there's a misunderstanding in Ukraine about the Normandy format and the Minsk process. It was all a French initiative to start with. It was François Hollande, then President of France, who invited both President Putin and President Poroshenko to attend the 6th of June celebrations in 2014. So it was, after the annexation of Crimea and after the beginning of the conflict in Donbass. And so the French took the initiatives and always have been very active and involved because it was a Franco-German project. I don't think Hollande was just running after Mrs. Merkel. He really took the initiative, and that's certainly one thing he did very well, François Hollande. And there never was any German domination over the Minsk process, even though the German Chancellor played more of a vocal role because of her special capacity to talk to Putin and to be tough with him for a number of reasons. And she has had the experience of dealing with Vladimir Putin for quite a number of years, where Macron had, Hollande had hardly met him before, and today, for Macron, it was his first encounter with Putin recently. So I think what's going to happen is more continuity than change. We will continue to go for the Normandy format as the format of the Minsk negotiation process, because Minsk process is not just the summits, but it's a constant process of discussions at other levels than heads of states and government. So I think this will continue, knowing very well that there is no goodwill coming from Moscow on any major breakthrough in the negotiation to seriously implement a ceasefire and disarming Eastern Donbass. Our problem is that we have no influence on the Putin leadership. We can't change their policies, and it's very difficult to adjust to this. At the same time, we need to keep the Minsk process going, and it's a lot of work. And I think for that we need also the Ukrainian side to be very clear on what it wants to achieve and what it sees for Donbass in the future. Not just tomorrow, because the situation is very stuck for tomorrow, but in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, we are still waiting for the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian government to explain what is their vision and strategy for Eastern Donbass and the displaced people. And I think this is what we need to hear now, because this situation is going to last. It's not going to be solved in 6 months or so, and the maneuvering margin with Moscow is very limited. But that can also be an opening for a more forceful partnership with Kiev. As long as Kiev really also plays its part, and playing its part is just it's not redrafting a new constitution, but it's really getting engaged in continuing to support people that live in Donbass, in the occupied and non-occupied parts of Donbass, and that there is a project in the future for a fully sovereign Ukraine.